Hi there, and thanks for joining us for this knowledge series focusing on Atlassian migrations. Now, we've put together this series of videos to help customers think through and plan through their migration off server, whether that's to data center or to the cloud. There's lots of questions, lots of information that I think customers should know about. There are ways for you to minimize the cost of migration. In fact, there are things to think about whether or not you should migrate. So, with the help of my team, we'll be talking through a number of points, sharing our knowledge, our experience, and giving you some advice on things to consider. So, we'll jump into this episode where we'll be covering off a number of points. So you'll see here, these are the topics that we're going to be covering in this episode. And you'll see over the next few episodes we'll be covering a range of topics that really capture what the full set of considerations should be for a client. So let's get into it.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is have a talk about the differences between server and cloud. So there's a number of differences that I think customers want to know about. So what do you think are some of those key differences? Let's have a chat about them. Cale, any thoughts?
The main difference between server and cloud is obviously the infrastructure side of things. So managing your own infrastructure with a server instance is useful for the reasons of ensuring you know where your data is, being able to control and configure the application system environments as you require, but also you have to weigh that with the cost of owning that infrastructure and managing it yourself. Whereas naturally with cloud, you are giving away that responsibility to Atlassian, and as they are the developers of the products themselves, they are probably better positioned to manage both the configuration, the performance side of things, as well as the security of their applications and infrastructure.
Yeah, look, that's a good point. I mean, that's a good point. And in fact, it touches also the headache of performance. In your data center, you've got to feed the resources, into your infrastructure to get that performance. Whereas in the cloud, that's going to scale automatically. Some of the other, and there's the other thing that is pertinent is the whole data security piece. So, clients will have sensitive customer data, and we kind of see that in fintech and government, where there's sensitive customer data that's being held in Jira, and so they don't want that in a public cloud environment. So those clients tend to lean towards data center.
So there's no solution in cloud for that. There's no security in cloud at all.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Cale, do you want to talk about the pinning of data?
Sure. I mean, with Atlassian Cloud, naturally you are providing your data to them. They will be hosting it for you. But in relation to where your data must remain in terms of geographic location, which could change which laws or which regulatory compliances you do have, you can pin your data to a specific region. So, for example, Australian customers could pin their data to Australia and ensure that it's not replicated necessarily. But at the same time, there are limitations to that functionality this time that I'm aware of anyway.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because it's interesting to note that you can pin your Jira and Confluence data to Australia, but you can't do that for products like Opsgenie and Bitbucket. So I think it's important for clients to read up on the fine detail on those elements. And probably the last item is around customization. I think a lot of server customers have enjoyed being able to customize at a really fine detail level, whereas in the cloud, you lose a lot of that power. There is, with apps are developing and some of that is opening up, but I think there's still a lot of white space between the customization you can do in server versus cloud, particularly even things like for apps like Confluence, where customers do want to do a lot of UI customization. We come across that as being kind of a key limitation in the cloud. Okay, so apart from moving on from then the differences between server and cloud from an infrastructure management point of view, then the other consideration is licensing and plans. And so, the only real consideration there is data center, and this is probably more problematic in the Australian market. Data center starts at 500 users, and so there's lots of organizations that have less than 500 people that would like to use data center, and so there's arguably a burden in licensing costs to take up that data center functionality, but you recognize that that's there. And then in the cloud, you've got your classic subscription model that everyone understands. The choice there for clients is annual subscriptions. Well, should I say annual billing versus monthly billing? So those two choices are available. And there are different plans. Cale, the different plans, standard, etc.
Yeah, so starting with the standard plan, there is of course the free plan if you're small enough, but there is the standard plan, first paid tier plan, providing probably most limited set of features available for the Atlassian cloud, but good enough for a small instance that is requiring the paid features that the Atlassian cloud provides. And moving on to the premium subscription, which does up your storage allowances in one case. It also provides functionality for sandbox environments for some of the products. And is probably the highest tier most organizations would need until moving towards the real top end, which is enterprise, which is the every feature, bell and whistle required, and an unlimited number of site instances for you to manage multiple instances of the same product.
Yeah, that's right. Enterprise will be relevant really to the top end of town, large organizations. And I suppose finally, the other element regarding cloud is just the structure of the account and the instances that are in that you can make in the Atlassian cloud. And so, we see within client organizations, over time there's a proliferation of separate sites. People will spin up lots of free accounts with their own URL and even multiple small paid accounts, and then kind of the focused company production sites. So a lot of businesses tend to really spawn a lot of instances in the cloud over time. And that, there's a yin and a yang with that. When you have multiple sites, they are licensed independently. So you could well be, and quite often when we look at this, you end up wasting money. It's a really efficient license spend model. So businesses should look at probably initially combining that into a single site. We could probably have a separate session on how to go about consolidating multiple sites into a single site. That's kind of got a bit of a migration element to it. We don't need to go into it today. And then the enterprise bit that Carl, you mentioned, the enterprise licensing, that's kind of all you can eat. So that might be useful for big organizations that, have a real spread of sites, don't want to consolidate, but the enterprise account or the enterprise licensing will no doubt save money on the license spend. So that's probably enough around kind of the key differences. So for clients who are saying, look, I've got to move to the cloud, do I go to DC? Do I go to cloud? I need to move off server rather. Certainly we see that the vast majority of businesses are moving to the cloud. I think most organizations want to get rid of their data center footprint, and obviously those that have real compelling business needs need to stay there. So there's a choice for businesses to consider. All right, so that's enough on that item, and we can move to the next. All right, so now let's have a talk about why migrate. What are the options for a client to consider? Do they need to migrate? And if they need to migrate, then what might be the choices in handling that or considering? So the first choice is to migrate to DC. And it's an obvious choice because it's an easy choice. For many, it's probably too expensive and may not be relevant, but migrating to DC is easy because it's simply applying a new license key, and there's really no grief in going through an upgrade. So it's a really easy choice to move to DC. But like I said, I think that's the thin end of the wedge of the market that would entertain going to DC. So what are the other choices then? I suppose going to cloud, right? So if we go to cloud, Josh, do you have any thoughts about examples of options in going to the cloud?
Yes, certainly. So we had a particular client and they were on server, and they had a number of projects that were in that environment, a number of projects that they really didn't use. And so during that project, they decided on 3 or 4 projects to move to cloud. And we ran with that. And the great thing about that is you leave a lot of the baggage behind. You move into cloud with a clean set of 3 or 4 projects that are in high use, and you run with that.
Okay, and so they never migrated the other stuff?
No, they left it behind, and they were happy to move forward with the projects that we moved with.
And so what happened with the rest of that stuff?
Well, actually, that's where I came in. So the client, desiring not to lose the projects entirely, wanted to retain them in some way. However, they also, I believe the requirement was to move off of their existing data center where their Jira server instance was hosted. So that was the real genesis of the entire migration project. So I came in and assisted them with the migration of their Jira and Confluence server instances to a cloud data center, thus retaining all their projects as in an archive state that was read-only but still accessible to the users, that allowed them to also facilitate the decommissioning of their data center, saving those costs.
Okay, yeah, so that's a nice example. So just migrate core projects, and if you need to get rid of your data center footprint, just take those VMs, save them in the cloud somewhere. They're accessible if you ever need them. So it's a nice kind of a cost-effective, pragmatic approach to migrating to cloud. That's a good one. And I suppose, look, the third obvious choice is to not migrate, but just start fresh in the cloud. So for a client, the client may choose to say, set up a cloud instance, go and configure the projects that you need, create new work in the cloud, run down your server work in server. But you're asking now your teams to have that burden of working across 2 different systems. And I suppose there's all the extra work. In fact, if you're going to go and create new projects in the cloud, you might find yourself then you've got to configure those depending on what you've used in server. you've now all got that reconfiguration headache in the cloud. So, you know, you kind of save in one hand and you spend in the other. Yeah, interesting. All right, well, that's useful. All right, so let's move on from there.
Well, that's it for today, and thanks for joining us. I hope that information was useful. Stay tuned for further episodes that we have coming out. Make sure to register for those, and certainly encourage your network to register for those as well. Now, if you're thinking about migrating, feel free to reach out to us. We'll help you talk through those items that I think are worth considering to make sure that you've got a full understanding of all the elements at play. And we're happy to help you out in any way that we can. So thanks again, and hoping that we see you next time. Cheers.